Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of Fight Chat Friday with TKD Coach Academy. We are Adrian Byrne and Richie Ford, and every Friday we're here to bring you an episode of the very best of ITF sparring, competition, coaching, training, performance, and hopefully to answer some questions for people that we would have received during the week. This is our second Fight Chat Friday of 2021, and today we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at SKick and all the many ways that it can be used effectively in ITF sparring. If you're new to the channel and you haven't been here with us before, then we strongly encourage you to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button so you get notifications every Friday when we go live. It's going to be a good conversation. Really looking forward to this one today. So Richie, do you want to just run us through the topic a little bit and where it came from and where we're going with it?
Yeah. So this came in on YouTube comments, so we get a couple of suggestions every now and again that come in, and this was just a question of how do we approach ITF sparring in terms of the different types of SKick we can use. So myself and Adrian pulled a couple of clips from YouTube videos, so thanks first off to the official ITF YouTube channel, TKD Techers. We're also using a video from Madeline Lind from Sentry Sport. So basically what we're going to cover is 5 particular ways that you can use a SKick and ways that it can be very effective. And we're going to go through the pros and cons maybe of each type and some good ways to use them. And then also towards the end, we're going to actually take some unique approaches which are very efficient in terms of using their SKick. So different concepts that people use, and also unique strategies that maybe one fighter may have, that how they employ a SKick to suit them. So yeah, I think it's going to be very valuable for people to see the different types.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, the plan here as well is to maybe link this up with next Tuesday's live training session. So for people that don't know, we did a live training session last Tuesday, and we're on lockdown here in Ireland. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to get some live online training. So the feedback was fantastic from that. So next week, we're looking to actually link the 2 of these episodes together. So use the SKick chat that we look at today and some things that we can take away, and maybe put that into a more practical session next Tuesday. So make sure you check that out as well if you want to get involved every Tuesday for the next couple of weeks, 7:15 p.m. GMT time. And we'll be going live on YouTube. So just make sure you subscribe if you haven't, and hit the bell notification if you don't want to miss those, to get involved there. So yeah, hit this video a like if you're big into SKick and you want to learn a couple of ways to get it into your game and really flourish with it. I'm sure it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, and definitely if it brings questions to mind, or there's if it poses more questions than it answers, great, throw the questions in the comments for this video, or send us a message on Instagram, Facebook, so that we can tackle that for next Tuesday session, because it'll help us to, the best part of last Tuesday session was actually tackling some of the questions live and trying to improv some ideas on the spot. And if we have some ideas ahead of time, we'll certainly address those, and then the session itself might bring more questions up, so will be good to do.
Speaking of a question, actually, maybe we can give a preview of the question of the week as well.
Sure.
So we got a question in from our Instagram feed. So we put this out every week to see is there any one question that people would like us to answer as a supplement to these Fight Chat Friday episodes. So from Tila Melly, the question is, I like numbers, so what is a good ratio to spar lower, same and higher level guys in training? So yeah, stay tuned, stick around, and we'll tackle that question towards the end of the video.
Right at the very end. So if we jump in, there's many ways that you can throw a SKick or form a SKick, and it all is context dependent. It depends on what you want to do, what the goal of lifting your leg in the first place is. But we're just going to start by breaking it down into a couple of different kind of categories in terms of, we'll look at foot-to-foot SKicks, lift and carry, a more direct stabbing SKick, ones with a slight step or preemptive movement, and then on the defensive side, stopping SKicks and retreating SKicks, before jumping into Richie's specialist topic of just effective and efficient ways of using SKick that are maybe not completely covered within those first few categories. So our first clip is having a look at Magomed Narodinov from Norway with a foot-to-foot SKick. So we'll just kick off with this one.
Yeah, so this is actually something that we would tell people not to do, and because a lot of time you'll see people making a big foot to foot step, they get easily closed down, and people will
Mm.
go right through them. But because of that, then it flips it on its head because people are not really expecting it, and it's not a norm. It
Yeah.
actually becomes a viable shot, and you can see with the speed that Magomed carries through there, it can be very, very effective, and it has a little bit of power behind that as well. If you get hit with that, you know about it.
Yeah, and definitely a big part of it as well is if you can disguise the movement of the back leg a little bit with your preemptive movements. So there's quite a few different things that people will do with their rhythm and with the adjustments of their stance to hide that movement of the back foot. But one of the key things that Magomed does very nicely there is keeping his head quite low. And I think that's so he's not rising up as he steps forward, and there's no big giveaway with the hands. Yeah, he's keeping the weight down and he brings his feet together, keeping it very, very light, very direct, and it is fast.
Yeah, I think something on that clip as well is if do
I'll
we
go
get
back
that
to
clip
it.
again?
Yeah, of course.
We can actually see his opponent here is straight on. Perfect opportunity to go with that shot
Yeah.
because your opponent isn't really ready to attack coming forward so much. So a really good opportunity there to use that, and Magomed took the decision on him to make use of that really, really well.
Yeah, we'll have a look at a slightly different version here from Vitaly Solovay.
I like the change of rhythm here, just a little bit of so again, unexpected. So he lifts up, tries to come above it, shifts forward, it's not there, and then he just changes it up completely, catches his opponent by surprise with a little step, a purposeful step, just to change the rhythm and change the distance a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a very, very important distinction is just it's not going foot to foot because that's the only way you can kick a side kick because your flexibility is poor.
Absolutely.
It's going foot to foot because you've decided the opportunity is there to break a rhythm that you've set, that your opponent has moved in a way that leaves them open to that foot to foot movement. And it doesn't happen every time you want to throw a side kick, but it's one of those ones that when it's there, it's a very quick way to cut the distance between you and your opponent and get a little bit of leverage about it. Because if they're not getting off the line of that kick, of course, you're arriving with the ability to create some space. You can really cause some movement there. So,
yeah, I think that this type of particular side kick is something that you put towards the more advanced level only. It wouldn't really be something that I would coach with my guys or encourage them to use at a lower level because, as you said, people be kind of almost come dependent on it a little bit, and they can get away from the techniques and the side kick that sets this one up. This only becomes an option because of the lifting and the shifting and the carrying that we'll see later on. If you don't have that in your game, then this isn't an option because it doesn't really catch anybody by surprise.
sure.
So I think that's a very important point to make sure that it's not like a major thing that you focus on, particularly with beginners and people who may be a bit younger. It's more of something that you add on just to supplement your psychic game.
Yeah, it's one of those things though that you set these rules when you're teaching sparring in the beginning or to beginners, and then of course you add the except sometimes which everything works in its right moment, but you don't want to teach something that by the numbers doesn't work a lot of the time. So if you take that foot to foot side kick as a basic technique for a beginner, you're just giving, like, you're building in a tell, or you're revealing it to the opponent really easily. And you don't want them to do that from the beginning. You want them to practice something that's a little bit more disguised. So as we go into that, let's look at the lift and shift from the point of view of, in this case, looking at carrying and gaining some distance with it as we go. And as an absolute nightmare to start with, let's have a look at Colin Adolph's.
You can see straight off, like, look at the distance he's carrying with his hand, which makes this even more is just more threatening because the range that he keeps away, his opponent has no chance. So the distance is important here. So you have a few options. You have option of either bail out, like we see, or hold your ground. If you hold your ground, like the distance that he has over you, you're not going to be able to counter him. You're going to be just in the way of that, especially if he can lift up first, which he can, because he's actually so far away from people. Usually if you're a little bit closer, you can maybe get that as it's lifting, but that's not an option here because the way he holds his front hand and the distance that he has. So a fantastic option. And you just see the lift is the first thing that happens, and then the carry happens. So we'll see a contrast in that later on of where people may step their back leg first and then lift. So there's a bit of a distinction there, and if you can do this one well, it's probably going to be the one that you're going to use 90% of the time, and then you use the other ones, and you pick and choose the other ones just to disturb the flow of things.
Yeah, and it's one of those kind of advantages, disadvantages of being taller there for Colin as well, in that if he can create the space and start from further away, the leg is up before his opponent can step into the space and counter it directly, which means their only option is to move left, right, give ground. So they have to retreat from the side kick, and because he's so rangy and can carry so well, you can kind of use that springboard, which we'll talk about later on, where when his leg comes down, he's back up again and he's creating more pressure on the space.
What I really like about that one as well is that his foot is actually facing his opponent.
Yeah.
It's not really his shin, so he doesn't have that. So as you see, he lifts. His attacking tool is always facing his opponents. No matter what happens, all he needs is just a slight extension if things don't go so well. And as well as a nice little change of the height level, just keep his opponent guessing. Is he going middle? Is he going high? And that's something that Colin does really well, because the natural ability he has with the length of his leg and the flexibility that he has, it's a massive weapon.
Yeah, so we'll go with a completely different way of doing that for a moment before we come back to one of his teammates. But we'll go to Julio Carlos and looking at the pump side kick. So using the recoil off that front leg to generate the follow-on movement. So, back in 2017 in Ireland.
Yeah, I love this one. I actually spoke to Julio about this a couple of times. It's like the fact he recoils that knee back to his chamber into his chest, like it's hard to explain, but like as he does that, like he has so much momentum and so much explosive power behind that by getting the recoil, and not only does that affect his opponent, but the timing of that is very difficult to read. Usually it just lifts and it carries, and your opponent is able to time that and potentially get in a counter between the rhythm. But the breaking rhythm here is very, very hard to read, and most people don't use a side kick like this. So then it makes it even more just confusing for people. It's something that they don't see so often. So I really like the way that Julio used that really straight line as well. So the longest point of distance he can get from hip to hip, obviously the higher you go, the slide or the angle. Yeah. So it's complete length on that, which is it's a really nice technique.
And what I quite like about it as well is he doesn't have that huge chamber on the first side kick. It's actually the recoil from the first side kick that gives him that, that extra space. Where if you were taking the knee way back towards your chest on the first side kick, it gives the other person a chance to step into your space and close you down. Where he doesn't quite do that, it's after the first kick he gets that big recoil. And I think we're going to have a look at that one again in a while. But a different way of carrying yourself forward over the space.
Definitely, yeah.
So back to Germany, we're having a look at Alamin.
This is a nice one. We call this one the floater. He just straight off, you notice as well, this comes off a break in action. So the referee just says, Hecho, time to go again. And you notice that he'll actually come in a little bit and squeeze the space. And just as he goes, he just lifts that and floats it above on top. And see, just floats it in there. And very difficult to deal with that.
And in fairness and credit to Alamin, it is, in terms of your leg control, it's an interesting one because the leg comes up so straight, it's an easy one to counter if you're expecting it. You just have to float your front hand over the leg and stop it getting past the hip and you're through. But once it passes that kind of line, it's very, very awkward to deal with, and it just tends to float over the shoulder and be a threat. So as I said, the restart is a great opportunity to have a shot like that where you're actually kind of timing the referee's signal, and the leg just starts to float up off the ground, and then it just begins. So yeah, it's nice timing, and
we'll actually see another shot as well from Adam later on of using that same idea of using the stop in action to your advantage.
Yeah, and it's again, these ones now are looking like at gaining some space, and there's no intention to create a score on the first lift of the leg. And I think that's the important distinction between here and where we're going to next, which is the more direct or stabby lift and go side kick. So
again, these are the same kind of same category, I guess.
Yeah.
Of lifting, but instead of carrying it forward, they're trying to make it one distinct. What I call like a joust. So you see, like in the medieval times, the joust and just long direct shot. Kind of like a jab, really effective and super clear for the judges, of course, as well.
Yeah, we'll start with Adam Shelley on that one. Um, so
Very nice. So you see the way he lifts that there directly up. So it's just a lift, no body change or anything like that. So he's just able to lift up directly without any major adjustments, and it's just there. All he's got to do is extend that forward. What I really like about this as well is look how he's side facing, and the adjustment here to get the hands is massive. Just moving that front leg to the right of himself is massive to be able to get to the hands. Look how side facing he is here. Attack, and then as he gets close, boom, just steps out that leg to the right hand side, and then in perfect position to punch correctly then as well.
yeah, and there is an element as well with that. I mean, okay, he could be more direct. This is a different, like, maybe it's not the perfect example of just the direct shot, but what we really like about it is, as he's hopped in there, the extension of the leg, you kind of, because it's curled up in the beginning, it's kind of hiding the actual distance, the true distance, and it's for him recognizing now is the time, and it shoots onto the hip. And again, we're talking about covering the longest distance between you and your opponent. The hip is the closest legal target that we can go to, and that it is the stabbing nature of it. It's not looking to lift, to float. It's not looking to break through. It's not meant to be a very hard shot. It's just meant to be direct and put heel on hip as such.
And you notice as well with a lot of these ones, we've seen it already in a couple of clips, even with Colin, like once that leg has come up and there's no big adjustment to get that leg up in position with the heel facing your opponent, a lot of time your opponent doesn't have any option but to go back.
Sure, yeah.
Unless they can break the rhythm in that. But even on Adam's one there, it stays constant the whole way through, and all he does is just extend. So yeah, it's a massive one to get some momentum and to get people on the back foot.
Yeah, and that is one principle that's fairly universal across the side kicks, is that you do want as soon as possible to have the foot tool between you and your opponent. So, we'll typically look at it where if the knee is too high relative to the foot tool, it tends to cause problems and it's easier to jam. So
yeah, and on the flip side of that as well, sometimes you get people with their foot facing directly to the floor.
Yeah.
And then you get the other way where their knee is super low. So you need to get that balance correct of what's correct for you, and not to make major adjustments, and still have the attacking tool always ready to shoot based on any adjustments from your opponent.
Yeah, really nice example coming up from Michael McRoberts, who has, again, lovely side kick, and he just seems to pick that, that lovely balance of the height of the knee lift versus the height of the foot lift to make it really difficult to step through the side kick. But let's have a quick look here.
Yeah, it's a really nice one. And of course, Michael trains with Julia Cross, somebody who's quite famous in ITF. And a few times I've trained with her, and she's actually mentioned a particular type of psychic they use. We can see it a little bit here from Michael, of the knee actually, see the way it's not in a straight line with the body. So like we've seen with Adam there a while ago, the knee is almost in a straight line with his shoulder. Whereas I know Julia likes to work on the knee almost inside your body line, if that makes sense. So your knee is inside a little bit more, and I think I can definitely see why you'd favour that, because if you make contact with your knee like that, it's devastating, and you can see Michael catches a lot of people with some real strong psychics, and so Giles is another guy. So it can be a very, very effective way to throw that psychic as well. Where if I'm turned here, instead of having my psychic in line with my shoulder, it's almost inside my body line with my knee. And so yeah, it's another way to go with it, and very, very effective.
Yeah, and it does force people to go around the blind side, and depending on their facing, that might not be practical. And it's one of those things that again, if you're both sparring same leg in front, and you manage to arrive that way, it's very easy to then get your front foot down and follow into hands if you do make a contact on the hip. So yeah, so I have a couple of quick ones here from Magomed again, where he's got a couple of varieties of this, like what you can do with the front leg in terms of creating an immediate and direct threat. So obviously if you can go direct to the head, it's quite nice, but so as we go through this one, he's gone direct to the head, he's gone direct to the body, and he's gone body head.
Yeah, it's rare enough to see somebody being able to pick a side kick to the head directly. It's usually more of a turning kick like we just seen there.
Yeah.
But that means usually the distance is quite close. So usually your opponent isn't doing a good job of maintaining the distance if you're able to get a headshot from a direct side kick at least.
Exactly. But again, just it's the directness of it that we're really looking at to highlight these examples is, you know, and when you watch the full matches, none of these people use exclusively one type of side kick, and I think that's really, really important. They'll vary between the types, and like you do want to vary the length of the side kick, the height of the side kick, and the preemptive movements of it, because as you do that, you make yourself more unpredictable. And if you're taking the initiative and you're making your opponent guess what's next, they have to read it really, really well to be able to interact with your side kick and counter it. Where the people who do this instinctively well, you know, they vary their rhythm, they vary their tempo, they vary the length of the side kick, the pace of it, and it makes it, you know, what seems like a very simple, straightforward kick to counter actually really quite difficult to counter. And that's a lot of where the skill is.
And like this is a shot that will, I would say, maybe like 70% of matches it comes up. You know what I mean? Like it was easy enough for us to pull clips. Maybe not very easy to find specific types that we wanted to showcase,
Sure.
but in terms of every contest has lots of this front leg side kick involved.
Oh, definitely.
So like being able to use that is to your advantage, and then be able to mix off that to throw different varied shots at your opponent is something that's very, very important. Because as we said, there's a reason why people use it so much, because it is effective. You're able to maintain distance. It's a great scoring shot.
Yeah.
Once you land it with that direct shot, for example, like it's very, very clear to the judges, and most of the time you'll probably get 3 out of the 4 based on just the angle and things like that, because it can be such a direct shot. Where the carry one, sometimes it can be just a little bit too close on the distance, and where it's not as clear and obvious. So just having the range of them, I think, is massive. I don't think you can just settle on one type.
No, definitely. But I mean, even without massive, we say, kicking ability, and this isn't taking away from the person in the clip that we found, but it can be really simply done as well, and simple can be very effective. And here we've got a clip of Silvio Gamboa from Argentina, and just finding the hip, and you know, it's okay, the first one's not the best one, but just bang on that hip, it's the ultimate in efficiency, really, isn't it? Where you're talking about what is the closest point from foot on the floor to foot on a legal scoring target that you can go, and finding an efficient way to go from A to B is a big part of what's going to make a side kick effective. You know, and particularly where, like in that example, Shane is sitting quite low in his stance at the time, and you know, the hip is actually quite low. So Silvio is actually kicking below his own hip height almost, or well, at least the tilted hip as he gets into it. So you know, a lot of the time with Taekwondo, we're talking about kicking ability, and we're thinking of people who are very, you know, dynamic high kickers, and a lot of what we want with side kick is also the ability to hit that lowest legal target very efficiently, to come under the guard and onto the hip.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's about scoring your points and getting your points on the board. So the most efficient way you can do that, like the one that we just seen, is very efficient, because it is the whole game of combat sports, hit without getting hit, because the length of your kick stops any direct attack back at you. So by maintaining the distance with it, you hit, they don't hit. That's the whole sum of the game, I guess, and that's what you're meant to do.
Yeah.
So it's the ultimate efficient technique.
So going from there, we had the slide step. So we've had a very deliberate foot-to-foot step to gain big distance, to cover distance quickly. And now we're into some of the kind of like a preemptive step or a preparation step that's just very slight. You're probably going to try and disguise it or hide it as much as you can. Or you use that very small step just to break the rhythm that you've set. And we have a few examples of that being done quite effectively.
Yeah, like a lot of people will actually step a little bit naturally anyway. Because as they do it, it's just like they do it so quick that almost the leg is up in time. Whereas some people will do it step and then go, where it's a problem. But some people kind of step as they lift.
Yeah.
And we see just a bit of a contrast here between Sarah and Ellen. Sarah kind of carries hers a little bit more with kind of more of a flicky motion that you'd see a lot in the female division. And Ellen is just going a little bit more with the direct route. So I think this was a nice clip to see the difference. They're both stepping, but see the difference of a bit of a carry with a flick versus a step from Ellen and direct. So I
very
think
choppy.
it's a nice contrast there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I do think when you're looking at that first step, like what Sarah does there really is her front leg is already doing something as the back leg starts to step in. So it's not like what we've said earlier where it's lift and carry. But if that step is within rhythm, there's, you know, maybe some forward backward going on, some push pull, and you just let your stance get a little shorter and then you're off with the front leg. If there's anything at all where both feet are moving together and the stance ends up a little shorter and then the kick happens, it just disguises that back leg movement. But having that shorter stance does let you kick over a longer distance more easily, because you've shortened the distance and you've brought your legs closer together. It's easier to lift and it's easier to go high. So, you know, while we would absolutely tell beginners, first and foremost, don't step when you do a side kick, well, you know, that small little disguised step actually is very valuable. But in telling people not to do it, they'll still do it because, you know, it's natural. You know, it's going to be one of those things that as you're in motion, your body will find an efficient way to cover that distance.
And look, it's a fine line, because if you make a bigger step slightly more, which you'll probably start to push it out a little bit just to find that extra reach, you find out quickly that you'll be getting countered. And people will come right through that with their hands, and you might see a clip later on as well where it gives it an opportunity just to time a counter attack with it as well. So you start to know quickly, okay, my side kick is getting countered here all the time. So that's probably why, because you're giving off that cue of the step. So if you can make it slight and just play it to your advantage, that's fine, but you can't allow it to become a big step with a big telltale sign.
Yeah, it can't be as simple and obvious as bouncing in front of someone and then moving your back foot before anything else happens. Yeah. So here's Rostik Ivanchuk again, going back to that match with Julio Carlos. But I mean, this is over and over again, but different ranges. With that, like very stabby, almost the definition of stabby. And Julio is floating just on the edge of the distance. And although it looks like, we say in this clip, Rostik's not getting any return on that, he is controlling and taking space, which, depending on what the plan is, if he's setting a rhythm, this could be ideal, because he's just had 1, 2, here's a third one, and we've got reactions from Julio, and depending on what the reaction is, that could be exactly what Rostik is looking for to allow him to then set up a blitz, or to go with the step side kick, you know. But Julio has to react different ways in order to, you know, if Julio reacts the same way to each of those kicks, then it gives Rostik enough information that he can make that stepping side kick, or he can double up his side kick and carry it, or he can show the side kick and go directly to hands. But what Julio does very well there then is, of course, he reacts, you know, once he's open side, he's pulling the front leg and stepping into a wider circle. He's doing different things to make it so that Rostik can't just put him in a set rhythm.
Track him to a particular area in the ring as well. What I think is very valuable for this type as well is it's good if you're looking to preserve that distance. So maybe you have a lead towards the end of the match, or maybe you are trying to control somebody into the corners. Maybe not like Julio, because he's so active on the feet, but maybe somebody else who's a bit more predictable in their movement. It's a good one to be able to track people and to push them into the corner and really squeeze that space, like we like to say, squeeze into space. It's a good one to keep people guessing. And we'll actually see that whole idea of the springboard effect as well, of the kick drop. So we'll see that later on as well. But yeah, very useful way to go with it.
So this is one from Irish Cup in Ireland some years ago.
Again, like we said earlier, straight off and a break in action. So there's a warning or whatever here, and it's just a slight step and boom.
Yeah.
Because the distance is slightly adjusted from what they're probably regularly sparring at here because of the break in action. And just because there's a break in action, there's no set rhythm before this or anything like that. And it just gives Adam an opportunity to make that slight step. And again, boom, straight in. It's a cracker of a shot. Yeah,
and I quite like if you watch Adams, he's dropping into a lower stance, so widening both feet and bring them back in, and then he just brings the left foot in a little further, out of the bounce, and it sets up that shot nicely out. The back foot just comes in a little further, and I'd imagine that Collie kind of felt he was in the right place to go blindside or to go over that. So It was definitely a nasty one to catch.
Yeah. Well, when we look at this in slow mo, we categorize this as a slight step,
Yeah.
but really in the motion of it, it's more of a foot to foot motion. Although the feet don't join, it's a foot to foot motion in terms of how we would categorize it. Similar enough to the one we seen at the very beginning from Magomed, but just the step isn't as long. But yeah, again, it's not something that you would tell people to use all the time, but because of that, so effective then when it comes off.
Exactly. So we've kind of reached the point where we're going to cross over from the attacking end of the side kick into the defensive side of things. And the first clip that we're going to look at is just the no need to change distance. We have a stop side kick. And the whole purpose or idea here is if you can get the distance so the distance is right and you can just extend your leg, there's no coming through an extended side kick. It's just that's where the match stops. So we do have an example of that, but these are harder to find. Certainly at the higher level, these are harder to find.
Yeah, but if we look at the ones that we just looked at, and they were all where you are going forward with your side kick, whereas this one here, Adelina, she's holding her ground. So she's just holding her ground and maintaining the distance and using that side kick almost like a barrier between her opponent and herself, where Lindsay is obviously looking for the target here, and to get to that target, there's a barrier. And Adelina just puts up that barrier, and then we will see later on the version of going backwards. So we have the three types of you bringing your kick forward, you holding your ground, and you going backwards with the kick. So this is the one in the middle, the more neutral one, where you just put up that barrier, and we call it a stop side kick.
And it is one of those as well where it's a difficult enough range to find, because more often than not, if you're close enough that your partner feels comfortable pushing into you with hands, the distance isn't there for you to lift the leg on the spot. So you generally have to kind of create the space or create the impetus for your opponent to come at you, and they have to feel confident coming at you from range for this to be a shot. So it tends to be where you've used a springboard and it's from the drop you're kind of on the spot, or in this case where Lindsay was confident to go from distance and it's just misjudged, and Adelina's been able to extend the leg on the spot, but it's a rare enough one.
Yeah, something as well that I just want to add on with that is like we kind of mentioned earlier with a lot of these ones, is there's no compensation in Adelina's body. If you have to make a big massive adjustment to lift the leg, this isn't going to be one that's effective for you. She just lifts. So she has that hip rotation ability to be able to just pick that leg up. You see her body doesn't make much of a difference. And then as she extends, you lean back. But just in case they're able to crush through it and get through maybe with their own hand, you just lean back as you kick. But before that, there was no telltale signs. She just was able to lift the leg, and it's quite disguising in that way.
Yeah. And I mean, there is that element of it'll tend to have a slightly lower knee position as the foot wants to go high. And that's just a factor of the space. But let's have a look at the retreating side of it. So this is giving ground with the side kick as things go. And this one is Adam Shetty, I think this is actually against Magomed. But it is really about preserving the distance between the bodies as you go. And that's the underlying principle of it, is that, the first reaction for most people, they want to be faster. And because they want to be faster, they're trying to get their leg off the ground faster. They're trying to kick towards their opponent faster. And that's actually the wrong choice in this particular technique, because the number one principle is preserve the distance. So as your opponent is rushing forward, the very first thing you should be doing is moving your body and your center of gravity back and buying time for the side kick. So
kick comes second, really, doesn't it?
The kick comes second. So if you can preserve the distance, you'll get the kick off. There is no amount of kicking faster that will convert that into a stop side kick. It's just the distance is wrong.
It's the same concept really as a switch back kick. You switch to go backwards with the distance, then get the kick off. So you don't try to kick first. So that's very important there to get that across. And something as well that you might see, not at the higher level, but maybe people who are watching here who are kettlebells, a lot of time people will use this like a turning kick, and that's not the best approach to go with. So you have to make sure it's the flat of your foot underneath that is the tool that you're using here to stop somebody with this, because they can just crush through the turning kick version. It's not very effective, and the judges usually don't give it much return.
Yeah.
And of course, you got to be aware as well that if you're on the edge and you land this kick and you go out, it doesn't count. Adam here has plenty of room to go backwards.
Yes.
He's obviously conceding ground, but he's still in the ring. So you have to land this kick in the ring. If you land it outside, it doesn't count. So you got to be aware of that.
And you have to also have that, that angle at the end of it. So Adam's, he's bailing
really
out
nice
to one side. And you need to be thinking on, or have that in mind when you begin the kick, because, otherwise you're conceding the warning and the ring position as well. So, it's a bad trade-off. So we would always want to see people, if they're attempting that shot, have their ring awareness and the awareness of, the game state to know, right, this is the shot, or this is the shot I can take, and I have the space behind me to give that, to give up the space.
And usually this comes from somebody like Magomed, who's quite aggressive, and somebody who's looking to get into the action. But you notice, first off, you have to push them back, which is very, very important. That gives you the space and the leeway behind you, that you have the space if you need it, like Adam did. So Adam is obviously very strong off his front leg himself. He's able to push the opponent back. So usually this type of shot will come up against somebody who's very aggressive with hands, but you can't use it as the only solution to that problem, if that makes sense. You have to get them on the back foot for it to become viable. Yeah,
for sure. We'll look at a slightly different option here, which is we'll take the brother. So this is Ryan. Oh, my earbud is jumping out there. This is Ryan's one, but this is the jump away. So like Adam was staying quite low and floating backwards, but Ryan is gaining his space a little bit differently here. But we'll jump to this one next.
Very nice, and you can see he just, with this one, the clip is quite a little bit short, but he lands inside the ring, which is vital.
Yeah.
And again, you see the body position of, he's against Niels here from Germany, and his body position is quite square on because he's looking to get the hands. So it just makes it a nice direct shot, and almost kind of like a back kick really, but not a back kick, if that makes sense. But yeah, great shot. Again, you need to be aware of your spacing for this.
Yeah, and sometimes it's worth the trade-off. So, if the score emerges and you can get your foot down and then you exit the ring, maybe it's a good enough trade-off at a particular point in time in the match. But, generally speaking, the disadvantage of the jump is that you can get some backward space, but it takes a little longer to get you up there, and the landing is a little harder to control. So when you hit the ground, the exit is far more likely than the lower one that Adam had earlier, and it's simply because you've got so much mass coming down to then change direction. It just challenges your agility.
This particular shot, actually, like this particular occurrence with Ryan, actually happens towards the end of a match a lot.
Yeah.
So as I was going through these clips as well, I seen a similar shot, like to finish off two matches. So when somebody has the lead and somebody's just literally charging at you to give it the last go, it's a nice one that you'll see pop up then. So there's that jumping away kick, so you might even get the extra points to add on to your score.
Yeah, it's just the clarity of it, isn't it? It's like, it makes the shot a little bit more obvious rather than, would say, the knee tucked slightly off, back facing kind of one. And
just on that as well, I think the jumping is very, very important for some people that may be watching. Like, the jump is not directly up. And this is something that I see with a lot of my own students who might be lower colour belts, for example. The jump is to bring you space away from the opponent. So like Adrian said earlier, the reason you got to make the space first and then kick. So it's not kick and then jump.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not jump up. It's jumping away to maintain that distance as your opponent is coming in.
Yeah, and a huge thing that you're looking for there is, like, if your opponent can get a punch to land, the trade-off's not good. So that is the one potential advantage of that jump up and away, as in, the jump away is that your head, the distance between your head and, your opponent's gloves is increasing. That's the idea that we're hitting at there. A slightly different example in this one with a lower knee.
Yeah, I like this one. And it's actually something that you see a lot. Terms of return, I don't know if it's it's a great shot. Don't get me wrong, it's a stop on your opponent. But then the fact that I think it's Ahmed here is able to still get through with hands. So you really need to be able to put a stop on them here, like you see in this one from Slovenia, for example. You need to be able to stop your opponent from continuing through because the distance is naturally going to be so close with the knee dropping down. You
Yeah.
might not get as much return on that kick. Maybe one judge there in the corner that's actually facing us and will probably see that handy enough. But then Ahmed's hands are getting through quite clear on the next exchange. So you got to be very conscious of being able to just not have a continuation after this that puts you at a disadvantage. So you don't want to be landing this shot and resting on your laurels. You want to be able to get this one off and then make sure that the continuation flow is still keeping you ahead in this sequence. So you don't want to score a shot here maybe on one judge and then lose 2 points for punches from 2 other judges. You know what I mean?
Yeah, very important one there when you are attempting this. It's not the best example of it, but if you have a slight drop step, moving your back or your back foot away from your opponent before this happens, it often sets it up well, and it's very close to that. From Slovenia here, it just creates that tiny bit of space that you might need just to let the leg extend enough, because, as you said, because of the knee position, it's not a strong knee position, but it does let the foot come in under the guard. It does let you find the hip or the center line of the body, and it creates space by basically changing the angle of the leg. So you're not trying to get an extended leg in there. You're having the lower leg come up at an angle, and that allows you to get the hit at a shorter distance. So not that powerful, not that strong, but enough to get a score. The disadvantage being your head hasn't been taken out of the way. It's you haven't put yourself out of harm's way. So
yeah, and it's actually one that probably, I wouldn't say it comes from, but it's definitely, there's an influence from wacko point fighting in this. You see it a lot in point fighting.
Yeah.
And think about what happens there once they get that contact, that the match is stopped.
Yes.
And so we need to be aware of that there is a continuation for us in ITF. And so by having that lower knee position, yes, you can get off a score, and it can be a lovely one, just like you said. But you need to be conscious of what comes next.
Yeah, and I think if you can throw that one with the, as you said, adjusting the back foot so that your opponent hitting your foot turns your body off the line. We didn't have an example of that one, but that can give you the space, or can give you the bailout that you need after a shot like that.
Do you mean as your foot is landing on it, it spins you almost?
Yeah. So if in setting it up, you're putting your back foot behind, effectively behind you or to your back, and you're changing the line of your body so that as they hit your foot, it's causing you to spin. That can sometimes just buy you a little safety by throwing you off the line of the attack, and it's a little bit like the side kick into the back kick or whatever, where you're using your opponent's momentum to position yourself for the follow on, and by just taking your back foot out of the line of the attack, they're then spinning you off the line of the attack as it hits. So it can be used that way too, particularly when you're towards the corner, and them hitting into you might actually spin you into the open ring rather than throwing you out.
We see people. Some people are able to do that really well with like a hook kick.
Yes,
they can almost like turn their back foot to come off at a bit of an angle.
Yeah,
and almost leave their hook kick. People almost run into the hook kick directly instead of like side facing.
Yeah, exactly that. So it brings us then to our little collection of effective uses of side kick that don't really fall under those categories exactly, but definitely worth highlighting today. So we'll start with a little bit of a return to Julio Carlos and that recoil that he has off of the front leg, and it just creates that uncertainty about what's coming next for his opponents.
Yeah, I like this because Julio is a very explosive athlete, and being able to use this is actually very good. And you see he gets a return of a headshot here. So it almost gives you a bit of momentum. It's like a springboard is kind of like what we like to call it, this as well. But then the recoil, you see both in action. So using the drop and using the knee together can be very effective, and you don't know what's coming. So the Belarusian here, he's not sure, should I go, should I stay? And it's very effective that way, because you're like, right, is he going to attack again like he just did here? And then the recoil makes you think, oh, maybe he's not. So I think linking the two of these together is very, very good.
And one of the things that Julio does very well with this as well is, and it sets him up sometimes for going to hands afterwards, is the recoil pops his standing leg in under his base of support really well. So if he just pulls his front leg down without throwing a shot, and it happens a little bit later here, but he goes back to hands, or to legs, with the springboard, you can use that dropping leg like from here to catapult you into hands quite well. So it was after this first one, when he recoils back and pulls down, his standing leg is so close. If he goes directly into hands there, like it's no distance to cover at all. And he does that very effectively from time to time. But he also loves that blindside dolio over the shoulder. So
and
can't
look,
take it away from him.
He's threatening both here, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's threatening the psychic and you see it in this clip. Look, the rotation of the knee. He's just threatening both, and you're not sure, right? You're like, if I go, I'm going to get kicked in the head. If I go forward, maybe he's going to smash me with the psychic. So it's all about having your opponent on edge and keeping them guessing all the time, not just having one go-to. Really, you need to be variable.
Yeah, and if your default is, well, I got to give ground to this, ground is finite, space is finite, you're going to run out of space, and then you can just increase the pressure until the warnings are conceded, and then you're behind on the scoreboard, and the initiative has changed, and you have to do something. Or just human nature, we feel like we should do something, so we go and the moment isn't right. So yeah, Julio does a great job of building pressure by, as such, keeping the shot as variable as possible. Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think that's actually one of his big things, that he'll use that pressure to get you to almost like a fight or flight option, and then you go forward, and that's where he'll pick you off very easily. Then he's a great counter fighter. So he's using that pressure and then you have to relieve it eventually or step out. If you step out, happy days. If not, then you're just kind of playing into his game a little bit more.
So speaking of keeping them guessing, we have a lovely clip of Vitali using the front leg quite dynamically, and picking different ranges and heights.
Yeah, I like this clip because he's throughout the couple of clips that we picked here from almost the same fight, he's using the Yap Dolio version, the side turning kick version, and the side kick. He's mixing them, so it's hard to get a timing on it to counter it. And he's changing heights as well. It's like, right, is this going to the head? Is it going to the body? Very similar to what we just seen from Julio. He's like, okay, we threaten into the head, we threaten to the body, but it's just a different way of doing it. And he just carries his leg a little bit different, but the principle is the same. It's just like, you don't know whether it's coming directly in a straight line or a little bit of a circular line with the turning kick, or is it coming higher middle? And just keeping your opponent guessing with all those as you attack it is massive. Yeah,
and because he's sparring a right-legged fighter there, it is, as you said, it's the side kick and the blindside dolio for the most part that he threatens. And then if he was sparring another left-legged fighter, all of a sudden it's the side kick and the hacks that he threatens. And it's that element of, I suppose, you can cover everything, so he's making you kind of keep the front hand neutral enough, you can focus on defending the body, and then he's mixing the distances and the rhythms. So I think it's very, very effective.
And you just see here, it's like, you don't know what kind of emotion is taken. Is it going to be that dolio motion, dolio, or is it a psychic? Then direct here. See this direct one? It's like that stabbing, jousting mode that we talked about earlier. So just having all of those in your toolkit is massive, because you don't know as an opponent which one is going to come. So I think that's one of the major takeaways of this, is not just having one type, being able to play between a couple. Yeah,
and again, adjusting that rhythm. The next clip we picked is actually a phrase that we use an awful lot of the time. It's the exit strategy. So using the side kick as an exit. So the work is done getting in, and the side kick isn't done on the way in, and it's not done as a counter attack effectively. It's just an exit. So this one from Rostic against Julio. So the pressure is put on with the front hand, and then just from that spot to cover his exit, the side kick becomes nice.
And it's like you only mentioned this, Adrian, I think it was a couple of episodes ago, of obviously when you make contact to the head, the body opens, and vice versa. So this is a nice, almost like a setup. Obviously Rustic knows that what he's going for here. He's setting, it's almost a step ahead, and you set people up with this. So it's like almost like the retreating psychic that we've seen earlier on. But it's a nice setup and just quite unique. It's not something you always see. Very nice.
No, but it's a far more evolved and refined throwback to the one that we used to do as kids many moons ago, where you'd kind of flick the front hand out towards the face and kick to the hip, and it was a very contrived looking thing, but we used to laugh at it because it would work half the time, and you just like have this step in, like back fist kind of thing that you throw out there, and then you throw the side kick to the hip, and it's almost like made you blink, and but in reality that is kind of what it is. It's as simple as you respond because there's a fist in your face, and now there's an opening below. So, yeah, why not?
It actually works well as well with the foot to foot side kick. So like Rustic used it here as an exit strategy, but kind of like what you were saying, if you can almost throw that front hand in front and go foot to foot, it's just a little bit of a distractor on the front hand. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that kind of cut that you don't see the foot to foot part because something's flashing in front of your face. Yeah.
So you can use it both ways. Yeah, you can use it as the exit strategy or an entry. Strategy. Yeah.
So we've got two variations in terms of, the kind of getting on top or, adjusting to the drop of the leg, but or three even if we include the springboard. But this one is just, we weren't super happy with our examples of these last three, but, we'll go with them anyway. But this is about kind of waiting your moment to be on top.
Yeah, and I think what's very important here is people that do step. So we've seen the slight step earlier. But if people are going at the same time with their own kick, if you don't step and you just lift. So watch Gidea here on the left in red. So as Dylan comes in, he just holds his ground, and by holding your ground and just lifting, you get an opportunity to get on top. But if he went to forward himself with his back leg, then he would have been on bottom. And we all know, anybody who's following along on these episodes knows the importance of being on top when it comes to both people kicking at the same time. And we've covered that plenty of times at this stage, but that's one of the ways how you get to it. It's just not stepping in when your opponent steps in, because there'll be a clash and they'll probably be on top. So if you just hold your ground and lift without, so see his back leg here, Martin's back leg, he doesn't move. He just lifts his left front leg, and now he's on top. Yeah. And that just gets you off. And usually will set you into hands, like we've seen, even in this example, it sets you into hands as well, where even with a jump. So by being on top, then you have the whole top of the torso as such, kind of like exposed for you to take advantage of because of you being on top with your leg.
Yeah, for sure. And again, a couple of different ways that it can emerge. But when you see it with beginners, it's usually both of them to go to foot and both of them clash shins. And then, but this is the kind of, you're recognizing that your opponent's coming in, rather than reacting and going the same direction. It's just lift. And looking at this from sorry, go first.
It just shows as well is that if you have somebody who lifts first versus stepping first, and like we've seen lots of examples where people get away with the stepping and it's fine, but if you're stepping and the other person is just a bit sharper on theirs, then they will usually get on top as well. So that's something to be aware of. I think everybody needs the ability to be able to lift, what I call lift and shift, be able to lift the leg first rather than get the step,
So let's look at the timing the drop. So we'll have a look at at this kind of the easier version of it.
So it's at the very start of this clip there, so we'll see it roll around again. But as the Slovenian attacks here, he drops, and that's a great time there where Vitali just picks up his own leg and comes above, which is very important. So if you can get the timing of that drop, it can be a very good way to get off your side kick.
Yeah, and from that position, if you're on top and you're kicking directly, if the judgment of distance has been good, it's a great chance to actually get a score directly as well.
Definitely. So it's a good one. Like I used to use it a lot with somebody who's kind of almost overextending with their kick. Yeah. If you can just time that correctly, and you catch them, because most of the time, if they're carrying the last one, there's going to be slightly a bit of an overextension a lot of the time. Yeah. So if you can just get the timing and the rhythm of that spot on, you can almost just shift your own hip back, and by doing that, you just kind of come around on top.
Let them fall forward into it.
Exactly. It can be a great shot, very clear as well.
So very last little clip here is the springboard, and it's easy. We can watch it, and it'll be familiar to people.
Yeah, I like this idea. It can be very effective, and I've seen it a lot recently as well. Doesn't get much of a return here, and the German on this one, but the idea is what we're looking at. It's that attack, drop, and using the momentum here. Julio is fantastic at it, and he's very explosive. And I think the point you made there earlier, pulling in his back leg underneath him, is a massive part of that. So if you can almost use that front leg to bounce off the floor to carry you forward into the next one, it's a good one. And even here, it's a bit slower, but you still get the principle. But if you can do that very quick, drop and now go boom, it can be a great shot. And you can even threaten to the head, or with hook kick, turning kick, other techniques as well. So it can be a good one of using that to close the distance. So usually if it starts off a bit further out,
Yeah,
it can be a good one.
but it does a couple of different things for you, doesn't it? So, it lets you break rhythm because the drop lift is much quicker than drop, bounce, lift, the kind of normal kind of rhythm. And it lets you mess with distance because it's very hard with that for your opponent to know how far you're going to go, because generally when that leg drops, you're in a shorter stance and you have much more choice about it. So you could go short and stabby, you could go lift and carry, you can change the height and go for the head. Like you have a lot of options there. So I think that's one where learning to use that springboard, effect, it's really important. Of course, nothing is like, the golden technique. So if your leg is dropping there and your opponent steps through, well, you've just been caught with your 2 feet together and you have no balance and you're in trouble. So you have to create enough of a threat with the first shot that you're creating a distance so that as your foot lands, your opponent is still in motion backwards. And that's kind of the key to it.
Yeah, and like it's very hard. We spoke actually last Tuesday in our live session about the breaking of rhythm.
Yes.
And to get the break of rhythm between those drops and the springboard is very difficult because it happens so quick. And chances are you're worried about the initial shot, so you're just drifting backwards, so you're out of range. You know what I mean? So it's those basics are very important. Getting your timing and your distance, and then rhythm on top of that as well. If you can have the 3 of them, then you're in a much better place to be able to use all these things more effectively.
So I suppose that brings us actually to, obviously we're going to go to our question of the week and we'll tackle that in just a minute, but it really brings us to next Tuesday session where we're going to try and take some of the topics that we've covered today. So if people have questions or queries or challenges that, they want to field to us between now and next Tuesday, we'd love to have them because it'll basically strengthen next Tuesday session. We'll have a little bit more fun with it. So we'd encourage you to drop a comment in below this video or send us a message on social media, Instagram, Facebook, whatever works for you. And we'll try and pick up on that and add it to the mix for Tuesday.
Great idea. Because we cover plenty there, and maybe there's a particular thing that you find with your own psychic that might be challenging, or maybe something that you're trying to figure out as well. So yeah, get into questions, drop them in the comments below, whatever, and we try to cover as much as we can on Tuesday and give people real value to get good takeaways from that.
Cool. So let's jump into this week's question, which again comes from Tila Melly on Instagram. And it's, I like numbers, so what's a good ratio to spar in terms of lower, the same or higher level guys in training? And, it's quite an interesting question. And the first thing that jumped to my mind was you don't usually get much of a choice.
Yeah, definitely. We brought this up a couple of times, haven't we? The whole idea of needing the different types of opponents and being able to use like your objective of what you're trying to achieve in that bout differently. Yeah, it was actually something that I picked up a long time ago in George St. Pierre's book. He mentioned it of the importance of having 3 types of training partners, and it's very much applicable because if you're trying to bring something in fresh and you're maybe drilling it in isolation, but now it's time to really bring it into the level 2, level 3 of skill acquisition and bringing it more live. It's a good opportunity to maybe to bring that in with people who are maybe at a lower level. Now, there can be a problem with that as well because maybe they don't have the same reactions that like the high level guys do.
Yeah.
And so maybe they won't bite on certain things, or maybe they're like doing things a bit strange that maybe messes it up for what it will really be like at the higher level. But super, super valuable. But I think a point that you made, Adrian, is very valuable as well, is sometimes you don't have the choice.
Yeah. I mean, if you're the top dog in your club, you are never going to be sparring the people who are at the higher level. So that's a challenge for you. So a lot of what you have to do is be able to adjust the challenge that you set yourself, the constraints that you set yourself, so that your matches against the opponents that you have available to you are still a challenge to you and you're still working on something valuable. But that's difficult enough. And it just shows how valuable real training and real sparring scenarios are with the appropriate level of opponent. And that's why, for example, in Ireland, we put such huge value in our squad training sessions where we bring everyone from the whole country together to actually train and to have opponents that are of a similar skill level and also similar height, weight. Because we can't all do that in our clubs. We don't have training groups that are suitable. So we basically have one-day fight camps where within your club, you have to work on the skill acquisition side of it and, challenge yourself as best you can. So if you are lucky to be in the learning phase and you're, not the top dog in your club, that's fantastic for you for right now. You don't have a problem to solve. You want to spend some of your time certainly challenging yourself with the more experienced and more skillful people in your club, and not too much time working with the people who are of a lower skill. But where that has value is if you're trying to gain confidence in a technique, in a counterattack, in something, then working with people who are of a slightly lower level initially to help you build that confidence and move through is important. But we have to do that with compassion, because they're not our punching bags. So, your job is to help them improve and learn as well. So you always want to have it where, the success to failure. So Tila Melly, don't actually know the real name, but the Instagram handle. If you want to put numbers on it, you want to be edging it to where you're successful in what you're attempting about 55% of the time. If you're successful 60, 70, 80% of the time, the challenge is too low.
It's not a challenge.
It's not a challenge.
You're in your comfort zone, really.
You're in your comfort zone, you're not learning. If you're only successful 45, 40% of the time, then it's actually going to be undermining your confidence in the skill or the technique, and you would need to adjust the constraints a little bit and make it a little bit more manageable for you. So the typical example that we have, and we spoke about it last Tuesday, is the confidence to blitz, where if you're afraid of the counter shot, you won't learn, you won't throw the blitz correctly. You won't learn it the right way because you won't commit properly. So you have to constantly tweak and adjust the level of the opponent and the level of the exercise so that you're likely to be successful maybe 55% of the time if that's the skill you're trying to learn. On the other hand, 50-50 is pretty good, because that means whatever defense you're working against that blitz, or whatever the other side of the constraint is, or the scenario is equally valuable to the other person. And when you can balance it so that you're both more or less successful 45 to 55% of the time, it's pretty good. But when you're trying to reinforce and learn and put into practice a new skill, you want to try and bias it towards yourself being successful a little more than 50-50, I think is the numbers game.
And it really depends where you are as well, doesn't it? Like if you're the top dog, like you said, obviously you don't have the option. But maybe if you're coming out from the opposite side, where you're just starting off, where everybody seems to be better than you, it really depends on your particular situation. But ideally, you want the most important thing here is to get the challenge.
Yeah.
And like you said, Adrian, so to be able to draw the challenges from particular bouts, whether they're like, usually if somebody's at a similar level, you'd be sparring and just as a contest. Yeah. And then based on the other two levels, you'd probably be working on things a bit more specifically. And I think that's the real way to go. Like you won't be able to put numbers on it really. Ideally, you want to be able to spar with people who are at a high level as often as possible. Iron sharpens iron after all. But it's not realistic for everybody. And so then that's where you have to get creative and have to draw out the things, doubling down on your strengths, while at the same time improving little things that you want to get better at.
Yeah. So I hope that answers it a little bit, and it's probably not the exact numbers that you'd like to have, but it's we got some numbers in there, so proud of that one. But
it's people really like the numbers. I think that's why people are big fans of strength training as well, and strength conditioning, because there's actionable numbers that are attached to it. Whereas combat sports and combat is like it's like the numbers are not something that are very black and white. Like the improvement, for example.
Yeah,
exactly. It's very non-linear, and one day you can feel great, one day you don't. So it's harder to kind of track progress in that sense.
For sure.
So yeah, it's nice to have numbers and to know where you're going, but not realistic.
So that'll be us for today, and so our next interaction will be on Tuesday, where we're going to have that live session looking at SKick and training SKick in isolation, and hopefully giving ideas and suggestions for how you'll train better with a partner. Obviously, we're going to carry over those topics that we had from earlier, looking at training those kicks. But we'll be really keen to see what questions people have after this episode.
Yeah, definitely. So get those questions in. And as Adrian said, like obviously we're in lockdown right now, so it's almost like just giving people the foundation level of what to be able to do and give people some context. And then we really hope to be able to, when we can get back together, have some training partners and people with us, that we can actually step it up a level and show people how to bring it from training into practice with using live opponents, live environments, and getting that decision making and all those variables that we talked about, the likes of the rhythm, the distance, all of those other things. You really need a partner to be able to do that. So we're excited to look at that after lockdown. But for now, we'll keep training, keep pushing forward, do what we can. If you've enjoyed this one, you made it this far, you have to enjoy it. So make sure and hit this video a like. Really helps us out. Share it with people, and the channel is starting to grow. And the more it grows, the more questions come in, the more value that people can take from it. So it's all positive. So keep that going. Really appreciate people who are sticking with it each week and really supporting the channel, and we really, really appreciate it. And yeah, get those questions in. Check out for question of the day on Instagram next week for next week's episode, and hopefully we see a lot of people on Tuesday.
Very good. See you next Tuesday.